The segment discusses escalating regional tensions as Israeli forces shift their strategic focus toward Iran and its allied groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, while the United States intensifies strikes targeting Iran's military infrastructure. According to U.S. Central Command CENTCOM, sustained operations have forced Iran to significantly reduce its missile and drone attacks, though Iranian leadership has vowed to continue fighting until what it calls the shadow of war is lifted. During the broadcast, panelists highlighted that neither the United States nor Israel has announced a firm deadline for ending operations, even as President Donald Trump suggested the conflict could conclude soon, reportedly stating that very few meaningful targets remain in sight. Iran and that the timing of the war's end ultimately depends on presidential decision. Meanwhile, CENTCOM issued warnings urging Iranian civilians to avoid port areas along the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz after a cargo vessel was struck by an unidentified projectile and U.S. forces destroyed multiple Iranian naval assets, including mine-laying vessels, bringing the total number of targets hit during the first 11 days of Operation Epic Fury to approximately 5,500. Among them, dozens of ships. Analysts on the panel described the campaign as a major operational achievement, arguing that U.S. precision strikes rapidly degraded Iran's military capabilities, weakened its naval power, and established near control over Iranian airspace, demonstrating advanced coordination and effectiveness by American forces. Discussion also centered on the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz, where smaller vessels could be used to deploy mines capable of threatening global energy shipments, prompting warnings from the president demanding their removal. The conversation further explored White House communication strategy, suggesting that intentionally vague messaging about timelines and objectives may serve to confuse adversaries rather than provide public clarity, echoing arguments that revealing detailed military plans could give opponents an advantage. Commentators contrasted reactions to similar approaches by previous administrations, arguing that strategic ambiguity has long been used in wartime leadership to maintain operational flexibility, while preventing enemies from anticipating military moves, ultimately framing current messaging as part of a broader effort to pressure adversaries while preserving tactical uncertainty. For discussion argues that significant strategic objectives in the Middle East have already been achieved through ongoing military operations, with commentators claiming that Iranian-backed militant networks are increasingly weakened, losing influence, safe havens, and regional support as countries such as Lebanon and Syria distance themselves from those groups. According to this perspective, Israel's military pressure combined with U.S. operations has severely degraded hostile forces, leaving them struggling to maintain operational capability and limiting Iran's ability to project power through proxy organizations abroad. Analysts emphasize the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting that securing control or stability over this critical maritime choke point would dramatically reshape global energy dynamics by giving the United States and its allies unprecedented leverage over oil supply routes, affecting not only the Middle East, but worldwide markets. The commentary stresses that military strategy often requires withholding detailed plans, arguing that uncertainty and strategic ambiguity help prevent adversaries from anticipating outcomes, while asserting that once a conflict has begun, leaders must remain committed to achieving victory rather than withdrawing prematurely. Speakers also highlighted concerns about domestic political divisions, suggesting that public criticism during active operations could undermine morale among deployed service members who rely on support from the home front, drawing historical comparisons to lessons learned from past conflicts such as Vietnam. Additionally, the conversation addressed criticism of President Donald Trump's frequent communications with journalists, contending that such public messaging may intentionally create confusion among Iranian leadership and contribute to psychological pressure on opponents. Overall, the panel framed the situation as a conflict in which momentum has shifted significantly, portraying recent developments as evidence of measurable progress while emphasizing the importance of unity, strategic patience, and controlled messaging as operations continue to unfold. The president had completed multiple phone calls, taking reporters' calls at Politico wrote up about how incredible it was this access and this transparency in the time. In the first 24 hours, in the first 12 hours, frankly, of such an historical and important action. But it was framed as his ad hoc and off-the-cuff comments. Rather than prepared commentary, "He can't win" is no toy point. He is given unprecedented access in real time to the commander-in-chief's thoughts, deliberation process, and decision-making while relying on the intelligence of our community. That is still not a left-print media can frame. It all thy want, to your point. The religious fanatics being confused by it, great. I will say this, the success of this operation continued and long-term is honestly because of the United States might, and finally a commander-in-chief with the vertebrae to act on its, also because of the intelligence in that region, because of our allies, that is based on the relationships that our intelligence community has with our allies in that region, that spans and covers multiple administrations. It is why the failure of the Biden administration to honor those relationships and those allyships, when they pulled out disastrously from Afghanistan and abandoned those people and their families in that generation, by that was such a slap in the face and a deadly fatal blow to so much of the hard work of that community. This represents sulfur monoxide, more than what the mainstream media has covered as they talk about polls, which are training in the correct direction. That is telling. Oftentimes when actions cover a certain ground, and they dragged on, and we have expanded our greatest treasure, which is the loss of our American lives, people are quick to turn away. This trend of approval has been growing, and that speaks to the fact that people see the long-term peace and stability in oil control goes so much further than a slight uptick, for example, in oil prices or the homeland security, that to your point about the defamation of the Iranian Navy and their military might and the combat effectiveness, there are a lot of cells that have been awakened. There's a lot of cheap and disastrous that are only dozens of thousands of dollars. Two costs that can cast a wide net and a disastrous impact. It's incumbent upon us to stay vigilant and prepared, and to refund the Department of Homeland Security. Looking at you, Democrats. Stephen Moore said this. Stephen Moore said, America produces more oil and gas than any nation on earth, and is a net energy exporter. If current disruptions are temporary, oil could return to the $40 or $60 range in 2026. Major economic boom unleashing a marriage, and dominant American energy was hugely important. The discussion explains that recent volatility in global oil markets is largely driven, not only by geopolitical tensions but also by normal financial trading behavior, as markets often react sharply to uncertainty before stabilizing. Analysts noted that oil prices briefly surged above the $100 per barrel mark amid rising Middle East tensions. Yet historical comparisons show current levels remain far below previous crisis peaks when adjusted for inflation, such as the dramatic spikes following Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine or the 2008 energy shock. In fact, while prices have recently climbed toward the $90-$100 range, due to disruptions and fears surrounding shipping routes like the Strait of Hormuz, markets have also shown rapid pullbacks as traders reassess supply risks and global production capacity. Commentators emphasize that today's energy landscape differs significantly from past decades because the United States is now one of the world's largest oil producers and imports only a small share of crude from the Middle East, reducing direct vulnerability to regional conflicts. They argued that political pressure to immediately release strategic reserves may represent a short-term reaction rather than a long-term solution, predicting that prices could naturally decline as supply stabilizes and markets adjust. Supporters of this view encouraged patience among consumers, noting that gasoline prices, while fluctuating, remain manageable compared with historical crises and may ease if disruptions prove temporary. The broader point made in the conversation is that global energy markets today operate in a fundamentally different environment, characterized by diversified supply, strong American production, and complex trading dynamics, meaning sudden price spikes do not necessarily signal a sustained energy crisis, but rather reflect short-term geopolitical uncertainty interacting with financial speculation and market psychology.